Welcome to part 2 of the EOC review. We are going to go over the historical documents leading up to the Constitution and the principles involved in the document. The first one, Magna Carta, also called the Great Charter. This is the first English document to ever limit the power of a monarch. It is very important because it established limited government, that the government is not above the law, nor is any ruler. That's also called the rule of law, which is listed right here. The Magna Carta established what is today known as trial by jury, that we should be tried by a jury of our peers, due process of law, that each person shall be guaranteed life, liberty, and property before the law. It's called equality before the law. In the U.S. Constitution, we have that in two places, in the Fifth Amendment and in the 14th Amendment. And we're also protected against arbitrary taking of life, liberty, and property. So, for example, we have to know why we're charged with wrongdoing, which is called the writ of habeas corpus. There are certain things like that. So, Magna Carta, landmark document, and the road to the Constitution. The next one, an example, is the Mayflower Compact. This is the first example of organized government, and it's what they signed before they got off the ship. It was an example of a social contract where all agreed to mutually support each other in their endeavor to survive in the new colonies. So the Mayflower Compact, an example of the social contract theory. The Declaration of Independence. This is the passage that you memorized. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are also called natural rights. Jefferson adapted it and changed property to the pursuit of happiness. This established the concept of popular sovereignty, that the people are the source of all political power in the United States. It suggested we need limited government, and it listed the complaints against King George III. A desire to separate power between a monarch or a leader and the legislature, a need for checks and balances, and it provided justification for the revolution against government. Remember, the very last part of it says, we mutually pledge to ourselves our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The very last paragraph declared independence from Great Britain. After that, the Second Continental Congress established the Articles of Confederation, which is the first national constitution. Remember, a very weak national government. They were under such a powerful king under King George III. We almost swung the pendulum the other way and went with a weak national government. It did, however, influence concepts of separation of powers and checks and balances, but it did not have an executive branch to enforce law, nor did it have a judicial branch. It was very heavy in the legislature. The next slides deal with the weaknesses of the articles. It could not tax, so we had no money. They could not regulate foreign trade, so there were quarrels between states and between states and countries. Even if Congress made a law, it had no group to enforce it, so the government had to rely on states heavily. Any time that we wanted to pass a law, we needed 9 states, not a simple majority, but 9 of 13, so it was very difficult to pass new laws. 13 states were needed to approve amendments, which is unanimous approval, which is almost impossible. So there was really no practical way to change the powers of government. Like we said earlier, there was no executive, and there was no national court system to establish disputes. The Constitution, this is very important, fixes all these things. It had a House of Representatives based on population. It gave Congress the power to tax and to regulate trade. It created a separate executive branch with one president serving a 4-year term. It created a judicial branch, which would be the final authority on laws that are constitutional or not, or actions of the president. It created a new amendment process where 2/3 of Congress can propose, and it would go to 3/4 of the states to ratify. And if you wanted to pass a law, it was a simple majority. The next phase I wanted to review is the Enlightenment, Thomas Hobbes. All of these lead back to the social contract theory. So in the state of nature, which means no government existed, man wandered the earth free, people could take anything they wanted by force. And remember some of the quotes from Thomas Hobbes, life is nasty, brutish, and short, that men tend to be on the evil side, and as a result, we have to agree to give up rights to ensure the social contract peace. John Locke, a heavy influence on the writings of Thomas Jefferson. Locke said, men are born free and equal, but as populations grew at the time, laws are needed to keep order. Men agreed to delegate this function to government. So we know we need order, so we give up part of our freedom in exchange for a stable, secure society, and that is known as a social contract. We give power with limited powers that can be modified by people at any time, which is a republic, what we have today, the social contract theory. Rousseau wrote the book Social Contract, and he said a mutual contract between people and government should exist. People give up and agree to be ruled so that they can have their rights, property, and happiness protected. And that is a key portion of the Declaration and the Constitution. Montesquieu. Montesquieu was a writer, the Baron of Montesquieu, and what he basically said was we need to separate power. No one body should ever have lawmaking, law enforcing, and law interpreting power. The importance of a fair and objective judicial branch of government is needed. We do not need to elect judges. We need to avoid it, to avoid despotism resulting from a feeling of lacking equality. So please create 3 separate branches. All this comes together under the social contract theory, which is the state arose out of a voluntary act of free people. The state exists to serve people. People are the source of political power, and that term is called popular sovereignty. And people are free to give or to withhold power as they so choose. The next portion is the Constitutional Convention, and this just remember a reminder. It was held in 1787. Father of the Constitution is James Madison. George Washington becomes the president. The first big issue that they debated was the issue over representation. Virginia, favoring large states, really wanted a house based on population along with other areas. The New Jersey plan countered and said, no, we need a national government with equal persons per state. And Connecticut came up with the Great Compromise, which is basically a bicameral legislature, and it's what we have today. The House of Representatives shall be based on population of state. The Senate shall be 2 per state and equal. The debate for ratification after it was written took place in many different states, but the key state was the state of New York because it was needed. New York and Virginia were needed in order for it to be successful. So many editorials were written by 3 men, John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton, explaining the meaning of the Constitution. And the collection of these essays is known as the Federalist Essays. Very incredible commentary on the Constitution, and we have a record of that today, what the founders really meant. The Constitution was passed by 9 of the 13 states, and it did go into effect on March 4th, 1789. The Constitution embodied the following 6 principles that are listed there, and I'm going to try to go over these quickly, and then we'll end this second portion. Popular sovereignty, we the people. Anytime you see the people leading, that is the definition. Who reigns? The people reign in a democracy. That's the first concept. Number 2, we mentioned earlier with the Magna Carta, government is restricted in what it may do, and each individual has rights that the government cannot take away. Things like life, liberty, and property without due process of law. This is known as rule of law. Anytime you see limited government, The government is not above the people's authority, and the people obey it just as the elected officials do too. The third concept is separation of powers. I've gone over this several times. I think this chart is very clear. We have three branches. The legislature makes law, executive carries it out, judicial evaluates or interprets the law. Each portion is listed under each category, and you can read that. Very important. 100 in the Senate, 2 per state, 435 in the House, reapportioned every 10 years. Executive has a president, vice president, and the president's cabinet. Remember the order of succession: president, vice president, speaker, president pro tem, and then the cabinet in the order that they were created: Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, and so on. Judicial, 9 justices on the Supreme Court. They are appointed by the president, they are confirmed by the Senate, and that is a very lengthy process, but that's how it is. All other federal courts are created by Congress. This is another way of looking at it. Remember, the main focus of Congress is to pass law. The president can Congress can override a presidential veto by a 2/3 vote. The Senate approves treaties and presidential appointments. The House impeaches, and the Senate can convict and the president can be removed, and the Supreme Court justice, the Chief Justice, presides if the president is impeached. Congress creates lower courts. Congress is in charge of the money. Congress allows for the printing and coining of money. Congress raises and supports armed forces. Congress declares war. Congress regulates foreign trade and interstate commerce. The executive branch, they can propose ideas, which the congressmen then carry out into making legislation. The president can veto laws. They negotiate and act as for foreign treaties, but the Senate, remember, ratifies those treaties. The president can make war because he is commander-in-chief. The president appoints federal judges, ambassadors, and other high officials such as cabinet. The president can grant a pardon, which is a forgiveness of a crime to federal offenders. Those are some of his roles. And the judicial branch. Their basic area, they can declare laws unconstitutional. The first time they did that was in the court case Marbury versus Madison. Marbury v. Madison established judicial review when a portion of the Judiciary Act of 1789 was struck as being in conflict with the Constitution. Therefore, they exercised that concept. They can also declare executive acts unconstitutional. In contrast to one separation of powers, being one branch, when you have two branches checking and balancing each other, this is called checks and balances, the fourth principle. You can read through these. I don't want to go over all of them, but I think it's clear what, if this is the executive, then the legislature can propose laws, the president can veto laws, the president can call special sessions into Congress, make appointments, negotiate foreign treaties. The president can appoint federal judges, like President Bush appointing Chief Justice John Roberts, and the president can pardon officials or federal offenders. Okay, on this portion, the legislative branch, how do they check the executive? They can override a veto, confirm, ratify treaties, declare war, etc. How can they check the judicial? They created the lower federal courts. They can impeach and remove judges. They can propose amendments to overrule judicial decisions, and they can approve the appointment, the Senate can, of federal judges. What is the judicial branch? How do they check? They can declare an act of Congress unconstitutional, or an action of the president, and an action of Congress. So just a good review as we go through those. The last two, federalism and judicial review. Federalism, if you remember this circle, these are federal powers. These are state. They're called reserved. Remember, the 10th Amendment says any power not given to the federal government is reserved to the states. Things that states can do: licenses, states conduct elections, states are in charge of schools, etc. Things that the federal only can do: copyright, trade, establishing foreign policy, declaring war. All of these, coining money, are expressed powers. We also have implied, inherent. These are concurrent, what they both can do. We all have criminal laws. We all provide for the public welfare. Both state and national raise taxes, etc. This is layer cake federalism: national power, state power. This is a review of expressed, implied, concurrent, reserved, and powers forbidden. Remember again, necessary and proper really stretches that power of the federal government. Concurrent is shared, I just went over those. And these are very important. What can the federal government not do? Remember, Article 1, Section 8 lists powers of Congress. Article 1, Section 9 lists things Congress cannot do, such as no bill of attainder. You can't punish someone without a trial. The government cannot suspend the habeas corpus act, telling someone why they are being held. You always have to do that. And no ex post facto, which is that retroactive, going back in time to punish people before a law was ever made. Article 1, Section 10 says things that states can't do, like grant title of nobility. The last area, the power of the Supreme Court to rule an act of the legislature or executive branch to be unconstitutional. And I just stated that. Marbury v. Madison was the first time that was established. Judicial review, judges reviewing a law or an act. You can read down through the basics of Marbury v. Madison again, but remember, it's just the first time they reviewed a law and said, gosh, it doesn't line up with the Constitution, so it nullified and struck out that portion of the Constitution. All right, I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to go on to part 3 of this review for the EOC.